Once again, we're thankful to have everyone who's come out and for the help, as our brother prayed, to be here. And let's get into it. Today I want to look at, starting with a passage that I tried to preach from a few weeks ago here on a Sunday morning, but I want to look at what I would consider to be the key ingredient to lasting relationships. You know, relationships are hard, aren't they? Having a relationship with someone takes a lot of work. And it takes certain ingredients, certain things to have a good relationship. It takes a lot of work. And, you know, there are some things that, like we said, are key. My grandfather, Roy Coker, who a lot of you know, he moved from Arab, Alabama to Birmingham and got a job at a cake baking factory long before I was ever here. And he became in charge of the icing. And they had a new hire one day, and he's always told me this story. He would take a big bag of sugar and pour it into this vat and make the icing, then you test it. And so that's a key ingredient to icing, right? You got to have a lot of sugar. He said one day there was a new hire who grabbed a bag of salt instead of a bag of sugar and dumped that into the vat. And he thought something is wrong with this icing when it came out. And he tasted it, and of course it was horrible. So there are some things that you have to have to make things good. And certainly relationships are something that there has to be certain ingredients. You know, if you just dump it full of salt, it's going to come out bitter, right? You don't want a lot of salt in your relationships. But you know, we are relational people. God made us relational beings. He's in a relationship with Father, Son, and Holy Ghost from all eternity. And so that's something that we'll always have to deal with is relationships. But they can be hard. You know, all relationships, whether it's if you have two people to have a relationship, if you've got two people, you've got two sinners, right? And then I've heard one person say one time that marriage is just two sinners having little sinners, and they all have to live in a house together, right? So you're going to have some things to make that work. And you know, here we are, 75, 80 people in a church. You know, if you have a church of 75 to 100 people, you've got what? 75 to 100 sinners. And so you're going to have some things to make those relationships work. The Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 4, this is the verse we'll start with, where I tried to preach from a few weeks ago. He's calling the Ephesian church to unity, and he says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you were called. And that word walk means to live your daily life. So Paul's telling them, I want you to live your daily life worthy of the heavenly call. When God has called you from death unto life, He's made you a new creation in Christ Jesus, and I want you to walk worthy of that. And then he says what you're going to walk with. He says, with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. The definition I gave that, if you'll remember a few weeks ago, forbearing is to endure pain and annoyance with self-control. Sister Nelda looked at it. She liked that one the other day in Bible study. We had to write that one down, didn't we, Sister Nelda? To endure pain and annoyance with self-control. Now, here we are in a church, and that's one of your most important relationships, right? Your church family, your marriage, and then your family are probably the three most important relationships that you have in this world. Now, how many people are in relationships with people who annoy them from time to time? Anybody? Just my wife? You know, if you get married, you're going to annoy each other, right? They're going to say, Carrie will tell me, well, you gulp when you drink. She never said that when we were dating. And I do. You know, there's just things that get on your nerves with people, right? But here's the key ingredient. Let's just get to that. He says to forbear one another in love. L-O-V-E. I believe love is the key ingredient to lasting, healthy relationships. What about y'all? She can, if Carrie's loving me, I can gulp as loud as I want, right? It might get on her nerves, but she can overlook it, right? That's what Paul says. You're to forbear each other in love. And you know, love, I wrote this down, love was modeled by Christ, and it's not based on a feeling. It's rather a determined act of the will, right? It's a resolve that you're going to love someone else. It's a resolve that you're going to put someone else's welfare above your own. It involves faithfulness and commitment. It's not just a feeling that you fall into and fall out of, right? It's a choice that you make every morning that you're going to get up and love your spouse. You're going to get up and love your church members. You're going to get up and love your children. It's something you can't forbear on your own, right? You have to have love. I can't forbear you. You would get on my nerves. You would annoy me. You would cause me pain. And it's going to be impossible for churches to be healthy, for marriages to be healthy, for families to be healthy if you don't have a lot of love, right? Brother Sam has said before about the 6-7 layer cakes, right? It's kind of, they'll have dips and dyes, but once you get the icing in there, it looks perfect, right? That's just a lot of love that you put over. Do y'all understand that today? You just cover it in love. So if we want strong marriages, healthy churches, and lasting relationships, we're going to have a lot of love. See, love is a motivation to serve others, right? You don't just serve others because you just wake up and you just have this feeling that you want to do it. You have to make a choice to love them. The Bible says that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. It was love that motivated God to serve and help us, right? It was Christ's love for us that motivated him to come from heaven and to die on a cross. Now that's love, right? Go with me to 1 John chapter 4. 1 John chapter 4, this is the epistle of John. In verse 7, he's addressing me and you today. Listen to this. Beloved, and we are beloved by God. He says, let us. Now anytime in the Bible you see the word let, that means you can or you can't do that, right? You choose what you want to do. Let. He says, beloved, let us love one another. For love is of God. Now don't miss that. Now, what he's saying is love comes from God, right? If you go to Galatians 5 in verse 22, it lists the ninefold fruit of the Spirit. And I believe the first one that he mentions is love. You know, without the Spirit of God, we're not capable of loving. But he says, for love is of God, and every one that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. In this was manifested the love of God towards us, because that God sent his only begotten Son into the world that we might live through him. Herein is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be a propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, listen to this, we ought also to love one another. He says, in the same way that God loved us, that he sent his only begotten Son into this world, the Apostle John would say, beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. You want a healthy church? Love one another, right? And as primitive Baptists, we ought to love that verse. Because, we take that word ought very seriously, right? In John chapter 13, Jesus institutes the communion service. They have the bread, they have the wine, and then what follows? The feet washing, right? And what does Jesus say? That we ought to do this to one another, right? And so as primitive Baptists in 2017, we're one of the few groups of Christians that I know that continue to wash feet continually in the communion service, right? And why do we do that? It all hangs on that word ought, right? That we ought to do it. And here's John saying that we ought to love one another. And he's saying that because without love, you're nothing. And that's what I want to look at today is love. What is love? When we have love, we've already talked about that. We get love once we're born of the Spirit. The person that doesn't have the Spirit of God in them isn't capable of loving. They're not capable of faith. They're not capable of having joy. They're not capable of being temperate, right? All those things that the Holy Spirit gives us is listed as the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5:22. But today, we're in a church of disciples, me and you, who claim to be born of God, so we have the capability to love, right? Right? All of us, we have the capability to love. So are we doing it? That's the big question. Was it James that said, don't be just hearers of the word, but be doers of the word, right? Not hearers only, but doers of the word. So what is love? You could go to Hollywood. They'd have an idea of what love is, right? And it's pretty sick. You could go to Washington, D.C., and they would have an idea of what love is. You could ask Oprah. She'd probably tell you what love is, right? But their definition is probably not going to be as good as the one that we'll find in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. So if you will, turn with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and we want to look at what is love. Just a description of love. And the King James Version of the Bible uses the word charity in 1 Corinthians 13. And Brother Sam has always told me, and I'm sure y'all have heard it, that charity is love in action, right? It's love in action. It's because love's no good unless you do it, like we said. So here is a description that Paul's going to give the Corinthian church. The Corinthian church was in a mess. They had a lot of bad things going on. They were so worried about spiritual gifts and all these things. And so Paul stops in chapter 13 and just tells them what the most important thing is, and it's love. Paul shows the preeminence of love. Let's start by going through verses 1, 2, and 3, and we'll look at what Paul says is the most important thing. No matter, you'll notice he says no matter what you say, no matter what you know, no matter what you do, if you don't have love, Paul's going to say it's meaningless. Right? So let's look at verse 1. He's going to say no matter what you say, your speech, no matter what it is, without love, it is meaningless. He says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I am become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. So Paul says, and this is us or Paul, if we know every earthly language there is to know, if I could speak with the tongues of men, of every language, I could speak Spanish, I could speak French, I could speak whatever, Latin, I could speak English. If I can do it all, if even I can speak with the tongues of angels, right? I don't even know what that would be. Maybe he's talking figuratively. Even if I could talk with the tongues of angels, and I don't have charity, he says, I'm become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And I almost brought, my daughter has a cymbal at home. And I don't think we bought it for her because we wouldn't do that to ourselves. I don't know who bought it for her. But she doesn't play it very often, but sometimes you just get to banging it and you'll just hear cling, 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 right? Over and over and over and over. And it gets pretty annoying, just to be honest, right? It gets pretty annoying. Bo, who was not even 2 years old for Christmas, got a drum set. What 2-year-old needs a drum set? He doesn't have any, he's like his daddy, he doesn't have any rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. So Paul says, even if I could speak with all the tongues of men and all the tongues of angels, I'm just a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And not only is he saying that I'm annoying, but the Corinthians would have known at this time that the gongs and the cymbals were used in pagan worship, right? In heathen worship. They were just boom, boom, you'd hear it. So Paul's saying, if you don't have love, you're no better than an unbeliever or a pagan. It doesn't matter what you say. If you don't have love, you're no better than them. Then he goes to your mind. He says, and though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. He says, whether you can know the future, have the gift of prophecy, whether you know all secrets. How many of us would like to know that? All mysteries. There would be no more unsolved mysteries. He says, if you have all knowledge where you don't need another instruction manual, there's a lot of men that think they have that, right? You don't need directions. You have all knowledge. Whether you have no doubts at all. He says you have all faith. But you don't put love into action. He says you're nothing. You're zero. Then he talks about your actions, the things you do. He says, though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. So he says, whether you're full of good works, you're feeding the hungry, you're clothing the naked, the things that Jesus commends in Matthew chapter 25 that he's going to do when he comes back, he says, though you do all those things, and though you're so committed to the faith that you would give yourself to be burned, but you don't put love into action, he says it profits you nothing. Now that should bring it home to us about how important love is in relationships, right? How important it is that we love one another. And then he's going to give a description of what love in action really looks like. And so we can ask ourselves, how do I know that I'm loving someone? Well, you can see, just like children of God, we say, how do we know that people are children of God? Is it because they do this or they do that? If we can see the fruit of the Spirit in people, right? If we can see faith, if we can see love, if we can see long-suffering, we can see joy, that's an indicator to us that they are born of the Spirit, right? So the same way, you want to say, listen to what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 1. He says, "Be ye therefore followers of God as dear children, and walk." Remember we talked about earlier, walk was live your daily life, right? Everything you do, 24/7, 365. Live your daily life in love, as Christ also loved us and hath given himself for us an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savor. So you say, how do I know that I'm walking in love? I know I have the capability to walk in love. I've been born of the Spirit. But how do I know that I'm doing this? Well, he's going to give us some marks of love in 1 Corinthians, starting in verse 4 through verse 7. And so the first verse is chapter 4. He says, here's what charity does. This is what love in action looks like. Charity suffers long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself and is not puffed up. So the first thing he says in verse 4 is it suffers long. That means that it's patient, that it bears the offenses of others, that it doesn't seek revenge, right? You remember in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says you've been told to hate your enemies, but I say to love your enemies and bless them that curse you. He says do good to them that hate you, pray for them that use you and that persecute you. Now that's the one that we've come here today to worship, telling us to do that. Now, how are we going to do that without love, right? We're going to have to suffer long with people. So he says that charity, that love in action, suffers long. It's very patient with people. It doesn't seek revenge on people. And then he says that love is kind, or charity is kind. And there's the definition I wrote down for kind. I love this. It says, disposed to do good to others and to make them happy by granting their requests, supplying their wants, or assisting them in distress. That's what it is to be kind. To be kind is to want to help others, right? That when somebody else needs something, you make it happen. You're kind. Now, I think in America today, we've probably got a messed up definition of what it is to be kind to people. To be kind is not to be an enabler, right? Right? What's an enabler? It's somebody who encourages negative or self-destructive behavior. No, it's easy if you love somebody to enable somebody, right? And in our culture today, if you tell somebody, well, this is wrong, what you're doing is wrong, they say, well, you're not being kind. Well, it's about as unkind as you can be if my daughter or my son or even my wife has done it to me. If you see things in our life that I'm not doing right, it's not kind to just let me keep doing it, right? If I walk out of the house and I look terrible, maybe, my shirt's unbuttoned or whatever, it's not kind for Carrie to let me go to work like that, right? Y'all get that? It's kind of humorous, but you get it. You got to tell people what's kind. Isaiah said this, Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20, it says, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, and put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. See, they pronounce a woe on people who do exactly what we do today in America, right? That call good evil and evil good. And sometimes we love people so much that we enable them to do whatever they want. They'll walk all over us. Someone told me one time, they said, my so-and-so's got a lot of problems and they've been on drugs, and I give them money and they'll just use it for drugs. And I said, well, don't. And I said, have you given them money? This is a true story. Have you given them money? And he said, no, but I gave them a check. That's the same thing, right? You're being an enabler. That's a true story. So how do I know I'm an enabler? Well, if you're justifying things, if you're having to lie to make somebody feel good, here's the best way I know to know if you're an enabler. Go to Google and type in, am I an enabler, with a question mark. Second link is going to be a list of 13 questions from Dr. Phil. Read them. And he says if you answer yes to any of them, you're probably an enabler. That's your homework today. Go do that. It's not kind to let people continue in bad things. Let's go to Galatians chapter 5. And we'll see that what Christian kindness, I believe, looks like. The Apostle Paul is going to come to Peter, and Peter who knows the gospel, Peter who knows what we believe, Peter who is who knows that grace is by the sovereign, or that salvation is by the sovereign grace of God, that the ceremonial law has been done away with. Peter, who stood before Paul and Barnabas when they laid out their gospel to James and John and Paul and Peter, is now, it says in verse 12, speaking of Peter, it says, "For before that certain came from James, he did eat with the Gentiles." Speaking of Peter, he was eating with the Gentiles. They were eating things that Jewish people had commonly not eaten. It says, "But when they were come," this is talking about the Jews, "when they were come, he, Peter, withdrew himself and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. And the other Jews dissembled likewise with him, insomuch that Barnabas was also carried away with their dissimulation." So today in 2017, we would say, well, Paul should say, well, whatever floats your boat, Peter. Just do what you want, right? If it makes you happy, do it. But listen to what it says in verse 14. "But when I saw that they walked not uprightly, according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all, If thou, being a Jew, liveth after the manner of the Gentiles, and not as do the Jews, why compellest thou the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? We who are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. Even we have believed in Jesus Christ, that we might be justified by the faith of Christ, and not by the works of the law, for by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified." I submit to you today, that was one of the most kind things that Paul could have ever done to Peter, is to straighten him out in love, right? That was a very kind act. So maybe you've got family members, maybe yourself, you need to be straightened out. If you need to get some friends in your life, this is just good advice. Get some friends in your life who you feel comfortable and they feel comfortable being kind to you even when it's hard, right? That's what you need. We need people like that. So he says to be kind. Then he says, "Charity or love in action envieth not." It's not jealous. Love in action doesn't get upset because you have something that I don't want. How many people today, we're talking about America, are obsessed with having things that other people have? They're so jealous about. In my age group, I'm a millennial. I just made the cut. We get a lot of. I'm not going to say what I thought. We get a lot of bad. We get a bad rap, right? For we want what our parents have, but we don't want to work for it. We want to do all these things, but envy is so strong, isn't it? To envy or be jealous. How many people, you don't have to raise your hand, but how many people do you know families have fallen apart over hundreds of dollars in a family inheritance? I know people that have squabbled about nothing, stuff I wouldn't even have. Now what is that? That's envy, isn't it? If you want to, we're talking about having lasting relationships, family relationships. You've got to let that go. You've got to use the power of God inside of you. Love's inside of you, right? Use it. Now, love's inside of you. Use love. He says, don't envy. And then I'm going to put these two together. He says, "It vaunteth not itself, and it is not puffed up." So love in action doesn't boast or brag. How many of you like to be around people that just brag all the time about themselves? Boast about how good they are. He says love doesn't do that. That's not love. It's not arrogant. It's not proud. It's not haughty. That's puffed up. You remember that Toby Keith song, "I Want to Talk About Me"? Y'all heard that one? I want to talk about me. I want to talk about I. That's not love, is it? Love boosts other people up. It doesn't talk about how good I am. If you're loving people, and you can do this in the church. You don't talk about how good you are. You look for good in others, and you want to build them up, right? That's love. What does love look like? It's building other people up. It's wanting to talk about it. And I'm going to tell you, if you want to get ahead in life, let's say you're in the corporate world. That's where I lived most of my life, in the corporate world. One thing that I found that is very helpful is just get people to talk about themselves. You want somebody to like you? Just get them talking about themselves, because people love to talk about themselves, right? Someone told me one time that said, a coworker said, "You should run for office here." Because you just talk to everybody. I spend about half my day talking to other people and half my day doing my work. I'm not saying don't work hard, but you need to get to know the people, right? And if you want to know somebody, get them to talk about themselves. If you and your wife are having a hard time, just get to talking, right? Get to talking. And love wants to talk about other people. Then in verse 5 it says, "It does not behave itself unseemly, seeks not her own, is not easily provoked, and thinketh no evil. So the first one, does not behave itself unseemly. Paul's saying, if you love in action, when you're actually loving people, when you're loving your spouse, loving your church, it's not rude, it's not impolite, it's not ill-mannered, it's not indecent, right? It's got some manners to it. And he says, it seeketh not her own. I love that. Love in action doesn't insist on having it your way. It's not my way or the highway, right? When you're loving your spouse, you know, like men. Men are the spiritual leaders of the house. They should be. That's the call to manhood, right? And the wife, the Bible's clear that the wife is to submit to the husband. But if you're loving your wife, and if you're loving your husband, you're going to try to make mutual decisions, right? Because it's not just going to be my way or the highway. That's the easiest way to ruin a relationship, is you got to have it your way all the time. I once knew a man who had been at a church for 30 years. And I won't give you the name of the church or the name of the man or the name of anything. He was a deacon at this church, and they had a deacons meeting on the third Wednesday of every month. How would y'all like that? Had to go over the budget. They had to go over this. And he said one Wednesday they had been talking about adding 2 handicap parking spots for 45 minutes. And he said, may I speak? And the head deacon, you know, there's always a head deacon. He spoke up and said, sure. And he said, guys, we've been talking about handicap spots for 45 minutes, and not one time have we mentioned how are we going to reach people in our community, how are we going to better our church. And the deacon looked at him and said, well, if you don't like the way we do things around here, you can find another church. Now, was that loving? Now, to the man's credit, he found another church. That's a good time to go find another church, probably, isn't it? It's not your way or the highway. And another thing that other deacon need to learn, it's not our church, right? It's God's church. If you ever get to thinking this is your church, you're in a lot of problems. You're in big trouble. It's not our church. It's the Lord's church. We're just here, and we should be humble about it. He says love or charity in action is not easily provoked. It doesn't get mad easily. It's not snappy. It's not touchy. Love's had its coffee in the morning, right? I got a coworker that you just don't talk to him until about the third or fourth cup of coffee. And then after that, he's a nice guy. By lunchtime, he's pretty good to be around. But before that, you don't want to mess with him. You ever heard, well, don't interrupt Dad while he's watching the game because he'll get mad at you. Your kids ever said that? If they have, watch out. You're not loving them, right? Don't mess with Dad when he's doing this. Don't mess with Mom when he's doing that. We need to always be open to our children, right? And just love them. Love's not easily provoked. Then he says, listen to this. Love thinketh no evil. It says love lived out forgives is basically what that means. It doesn't keep a record of wrongs. And it says it thinks no evil. Love, if you're loving people, if love is in action, you're not keeping a list of people that have done you wrong and say, when I make it, I'm going to get back at them. If I ever get the chance, I'm going to really get them back. That's not love, is it? Love forgives. Listen to this. This is Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 31. If anybody should be forgiving people, it should be us, right? Because God has what? Forgiven us. Listen to Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 31. It says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice, and be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted. Brother Sam said he ends every marriage with this verse. And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. Listen to Hebrews chapter 8, starting in verse 10. This is when God's talking about the new covenant. He said, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. That's me and you guys. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. If you're going to love somebody, if you're going to love your church member, you're going to love your pastor, you're going to love your wife, you're going to love your children, you can be assured of one thing. They're going to do things that hurt you, right? That's going to happen. They're going to do things that hurt you. But if you want to be like God and you want to have any kind of hope at relationship with them, you got to be forgiving. I said, I gulp. She forgives me, right? I'm messy. My wife, boy, she gets a lot of practice with love. But you're not going to keep a record of wrongs on somebody. You're not going to remember everything they did. I heard a comedian one time. He said it's like his wife has a Rolodex of things that are wrong, that he did wrong. She can just pop them up. See, I am a millennial, but I know what a Rolodex is. Did y'all catch that? See, I'm not one of the bad ones. My wife showed me a picture this morning. Some of our friends are in Disney World, and they had their cell phone plugged in next to the regular phone in the room. And their daughter, who's the same age of Evie Grace, walked up to the regular phone and said, Mommy, what is this? Think about that. They don't even know what a phone is. It makes me feel old. We're not going to keep a Rolodex of bad memories. You know, you could do that. You could be miserable. And really the best thing for forgiveness is, who does it help the most? The person you forgive or you? When you forgive people, it helps you a lot more than it helps other people, right? Amen? Y'all awake this morning? Is this boring? Verse 6 says, it rejoices not in iniquity, but rejoices in truth. True love doesn't get happy about injustice or unrighteousness. When it sees things that aren't right, there's no rejoicing in it. It doesn't make you happy. When you're living in love and you see wrong to others, you're not gonna get happy about it. Injustice is defined as withholding what is due from someone else. You know what that tells me? Husbands, wives, boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever. There's no silent treatment with love, right? You may have a time but that you need to be apart, but you give your spouse what they're due. But then it says it rejoices in the truth. So negatively, it doesn't rejoice in iniquity, but it does rejoice in the truth. And I believe that what that means is true love, it does get happy when it sees something right, or when it sees that something just has happened, when others are like Christ. You know how Peter, in Acts chapter 10, when he sums up Jesus Christ's life after the conversion of Cornelius, and he says, he's speaking about Jesus Christ who went about doing good. That's a summation of Jesus' life right there. That'd be a good thing that they could put on your tombstone, right? When you die, is that Josh Coker went about doing good. That's about the best thing that you could possibly have on your tombstone, right? That he went about doing good. When you see that, you rejoice in it. So when something good happens, true love that's inside of you rejoices. And here's a quote I found this week studying this, and I'll just wax bold. This is to my PB brethren everywhere. This is Albert Barnes. He was a Presbyterian commentator. He said, love, is pleased when those who differ from us conduct themselves in any manner in such a way as to please God and to advance their own reputation and happiness. They who are under the influence of love rejoice that good is done and that the truth defended and advanced, whoever may be the instrument. They rejoice that others are successful in their plans of doing good, though they do not act with us. Rejoice that other people have a reputation well earned for virtue and purity of life, though they may differ from us in opinion and may be connected with a different denomination. They do not rejoice when other denominations of Christians fall into error, or when their plans are blasted, oppressed, or reviled. So what he's saying is true love doesn't bash others for what they believe or what they may or may not know. You know, I think that's one of the worst things that we could possibly do as a church, or as preachers or ministers or church members or whatever it may be, is to make fun of somebody else because of what they believe. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, Brother Sam was talking Wednesday night about how many primitive Baptists there are in Birmingham, and it's almost sad when you get to thinking about how many of us there really are, right? What, a couple of hundred maybe in Birmingham? But there's a ton of good people in Birmingham, Alabama. Do we agree with that today? There's a ton of good people, and the worst thing that we could possibly do as a preacher, me, Brother Derek, Brother Andrew, whatever it may be, is to get up here and talk about how good we are because we know this and we got the truth and we got this. Y'all ever heard that before? Start skinning Arminians? Start bashing Calvinists? It's okay to compare and contradict. Hey, I've done this. Y'all have heard me probably, right? Because it's easy, because it gets the most amens. But what's easiest is not probably the best, right? You know, I could get up at the association and talk about how dumb these people are, and I'd probably get a lot of amens. preach this sermon and I might not get as many, right? I haven't today. Amen. True love doesn't bash others. It sees good and it just rejoices in it, right? Whether it's the Southern Baptist or the Methodist or the Presbyterian or the Hindu or whatever it is. You see somebody feeding somebody, just rejoice in it, right? That's what love does. He says, it beareth all things, it believeth all things, it hopeth all things, and endureth all things. It says that love in action beareth all things. That word beareth comes from a Greek word. It's S-T-E-G-O. And if you look up the definition of it, it says to roof over, that is to cover with silence or to endure patiently. You know what that means? It means that true love, when you have love in action, it means love doesn't broadcast the faults of others, right? It conceals it. If you love somebody, you love your wife or you love your pastor, you love your coworker, whatever it may be, you're not going around broadcasting everything they got wrong. If you want to nitpick the pastor, let's just use that for example. You want to nitpick me, there's a lot of material, right? You could do it all day long. I've got a lot of faults. But that's not love. And your church isn't going to be strong. Your marriage won't be strong. Love protects others. There's a fire station by our house. And I've told you before, my son is in love with garbage trucks and fire trucks. More the garbage truck than the fire truck, and I'm not sure what that means. But there's a fire station about a mile from our house that has a park that looks like a fire truck, and so we have to go there a lot. And outside of that fire station, they've got a big yellow sign that says safe place. You ever seen those? And on the place, there's a roof over it. And so that's what, when he says beareth all things, it literally means that you roof over or conceal things. What he's saying is love in action is a safe place, right? When you're loving somebody, if I'm loving Brother Mark, it's a safe place for Brother Mark. Brother Mark loves me. I can go to him and I know it's a safe place where I feel safe. And we all need people that we can be real with and not worry that they're going to go out and tweet everything we just said, right? I probably wouldn't bare my heart to the president, would y'all? Or the FBI director. They might leak it to the AL.com. We don't want to be that in the church, right? We want to love each other. We need friends. And you don't have to be everybody. Everybody doesn't need to have your problems, hear your problems. Everybody probably doesn't want to hear your problems. When you love people, you can hear their problems and not go through and broadcast what they've said. Then they put these two together. It says, believeth all things and hopeth all things. Matthew Henry said this, indeed, charity does by no means destroy prudence. Wisdom mage well with love, and charity be cautious. So he's not saying if you love people, you're going to believe everything they say. You're going to believe your buddy's fishing story. You're going to believe the news, whatever it may be. He says, but it is apt to believe well of all. So he's saying love in action looks for the best in people. All charity is apt to make the best of everything. I love that, don't you? True love is apt to make the best of everything. It will judge well and believe well. And when in spite of inclination it cannot believe well of others, it will yet hope well. He's saying if you can't believe well of somebody, if you can't give them the benefit of the doubt, at least hope that one day you can. Pray for them. And then he says, true love endureth all things. That means to stay under. I think what he's saying there is that true love stays with it. It keeps bearing, it keeps believing, it keeps hoping. It doesn't give up. Y'all understand that? When you promise, you stand up here, you stand somewhere, and you promise to love your spouse till the day you die, you're going to endure a lot of things, right? Now, there are biblical reasons that you can dissolve a marriage, but outside of those, you just got to grin and bear it. That's what a country boy would say, right? When you get married, it's the most wonderful thing that I've ever experienced. Marriage, to have somebody that knows you and loves you. Does that ever blow your mind? Sometimes I think, why does Carrie even still love me? It's kind of like with God. God still loves us and He knows us, but love stays with it. Listen to John chapter 13 and verse 1. This is love. It says, speaking of Jesus, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that His hour was come, that He should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved His own which were in the world, He loved them unto the end. That's what love does. It endures all things. And then in verse 8 he says, charity never faileth, but whether they be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away with. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, and charity, these three. But the greatest of these is charity. When you're getting your ingredients together for relationships that last a lifetime, you don't dump the bag of salt, right? You have just a big old bag of charity. You keep loving. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 16. I'll leave you with this verse. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 14. Paul's ending this letter to this Corinthian church that has so many problems. In verse 14, he says, let all your things be done with charity. So you can't control others. And if you try, you're just going to have a lot of heartache, right? You can't control others, but you can control yourself. And he says, let all your things, whatever you do, be done with charity. That's my prayer for Vestavia Primitive Baptist Church. I came here, I guess, 5 or 6 years ago. And this church is one of the biggest blessings I have in my life. If you're a member of this church, I want you to know what we have. But just like marriages, if we don't work on them, just like a house. If you don't keep your house up, I just had to get a new roof. If I wouldn't have got a new roof, it'd have started leaking. Then the ceiling would have started sagging, and then the ceiling would have fallen in, and then eventually the house is useless, right? And just like your marriage, you don't work on it. Any relationship, if you don't work on it, it's going to fail. Let's love each other, right? I think we do that here. I'm not saying we don't. Let's love each other. I'm going to do things that get on your nerves. You're going to do things that get on my nerves. I'm going to do things that you scratch your head, and you're probably going to do things that I scratch my head, and you're going to think, I wish they'd have painted that color and not this color, or I wish they would have put that plant here, not here, whatever it may be. If you're loving each other, it doesn't really matter, does it? When love's the main thing, it doesn't matter. Do this tonight. When you go home, go to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And when you see charity, put in Jesus. You'll say, Jesus suffers long. Jesus is patient. Read it. And then read it again and put your name. And see where you got a lot of work to do, right? I know I do. I love this church, and I hope that I can be a blessing in some way. If you haven't joined this church, we'll give you the opportunity now. Do we have a song that we want to sing? Number 252. I think we'll go with 252, Brother Joshua. Do you have that one? And we'll stand. Then the first verse. If you want to join this church, I haven't found a church that loves like we do.